Hello everyone, and welcome to our Fara Carrier Guide. Today we're going to do our second update for the Graf Zeppelin. So without further ado, let's go straight into it and talk about this ship. So, what's changed? Well, here we have our Graf Zeppelin. The main important factor is that we now have torpedo bombers. So, gone are the three super powerful armor-piercing dive bombers from the two different variants, and we now have the torpedo bombers back for the Graf Zeppelin 1 in the original envisaging of the Graf Zeppelin in the sort of crossed drop pattern. 5 torpedo bombers, 3 waves, 15 torps in total. The difference? They're now deep water torpedoes. So let's go through the different changes on the ship, the planes, what has changed, what hasn't changed, and then we'll talk about her in randoms, ranked, competitive, you know, how the ship might perform, and in his wargaming getting close to a final sort of setup that might work. Okay, so first step number 1. What has changed? Well, in terms of fighter planes, they're still keeping the Graf Zeppelin Test 1, so it's the same statistical numbers for the fighters, but they are at tier 7, so that has remained unchanged. So it's the same problems that we had and we've mentioned before. There's low ammunition, there's low DPS, you maintain your high speed, and the health pool is still not that great. In terms of fighting against the Shikaku, maybe your main rival, a 2-2-2 Shikaku balanced against the Graf Zeppelin, you can hold your own, you can do a limited number of strafes, but you do have to call back the planes and turn them around after a couple of strafing runs and that type of stuff. And a straight-on click engagement with dogfighting skill for this captain means that they're okay-ish, but only just, and I stress just. They're not good for scouting, they're not good for going over hostile AA, they're not good for fighting in hostile AA. They are purely neutral ground or friendly AA and limited number of strafes. So they are they're not a new player friendly plane in terms of you need to be very careful with how you use them. Okay. Now in terms of the bombers, there's some small numbers. The Stuka planes, we're keeping the same ones, but these are now torpedo bomber planes. They have the same speed, the same kind of loading time, but the difference here is that the health pool has gone up from 1,659 to 1,712. So the torpedo bombers have a little bit more health. That's great, not a huge amount, but you know, every little bit is a bonus, right? On top of that, the torpedo bomber doesn't need to get as close as the dive bomber. The dive bomber is literally on top of its target, and it's inside the inner range AA bubble for as long as it needs to drop its payload and then fly away, right? So I mean that means it's going to suffer the maximum amount of AA damage. Whereas the torpedo bombers, they have a little bit more health, and they can now drop their torpedoes, admittedly short range, but they can drop outside of the kind of the maximum AA range, or they're inside the strongest AA for less amount of time is what we're trying to get at here. So more planes should survive a greater amount of time. Okay, so that is a benefit. I'm still not super thrilled at the speed of the torpedo bombers. I'm not super thrilled about the maximum damage of the torpedo bombers as well. 10,500 is quite high, but their torpedoes are deep run torpedoes, and by deep run or deep water, what we mean is that, in a nutshell, destroyers are immune to your torpedoes, but every other ship, every other cruiser, nose, center, tail, every battleship, every aircraft carrier is vulnerable to being hit by these torpedoes. So basically, these torpedoes work against everyone but destroyers. And then there's even a little UI thing which is quite cool. When you go to auto attack on a destroyer, it says this: you can't hit this target. So there's a nice little UI pop-up warning that you can't do it. But if you're trying to manual attack, there's no warning that you can't hit the destroyers. The destroyers are entirely immune. It doesn't matter where you try and hit them. It doesn't matter what destroyer, even the biggest ones, you don't clip them. I was unable to hit them at all in the training rooms. So the damage output from these torpedoes is actually really high. If you get a perfect drop on something that's very long, for example, like a Kurfürst, you can actually one-shot Kurfürst, but that's not realistically real-world scenarios, and we will go into a random battle at the end of this to try it out, because it took 14 or 15 torpedoes to kill off the Kurfürst, so it was like a perfect drop, because you get 15 torpedo bombers here, and most of them connected. Bismarck, I was able to kill in the training room with 10 torpedoes, so the alpha strike potential of this ship against large targets is very, very large. And against a large battleship, you would probably attack with all at the same time, mainly because the alpha strike is so high that you wouldn't attack with 2 or 1 wave to try and proc a flooding and then come up with the 2 following waves to finish off with a follow-up flooding, you would probably, due to the still somewhat fragile nature of the bombers and the fact that the fighters can't control the airspace the whole amount of time, you would probably just hit a battleship as hard as you possibly could. And the same principle goes for cruisers. If it's a cruiser that doesn't have a defensive fire, such as the British one, if it's a cruiser that's maybe running hydro and you think it, or there's a defensive fire bait with one wave, or is vulnerable, or even does have a defensive fire but you really have to attack it, yes, cruisers are not the best typical targets to attack with an aircraft carrier. The ability to not attack from one direction but have multiple waves to anticipate the highly maneuverable ships and to torpedo for many things, and the amount of damage the torpedo does, you can probably one-shot cruisers as well. It really comes down to whether or not a ship has a defensive fire, and it's not a defensive fire to kill off the planes, it's just a defensive fire to cause a panic effect on the spread of the torpedoes, meaning that your damage done is less. But with 15 torpedo bombers, 3 more than any other ship in the game, I guess you might be able to still kill off a target if it's not full health. Well, we haven't actually been able to test that because I haven't had any games where someone's used a defensive fire against me, but you get the principle, right? It still does a lot of damage, maybe kills it off. In terms of destroyers, well, the secondary build of the Graf Zeppelin, the secondary guns are still your only defense against the destroyer. So if the destroyer spots you and is coming in to gun you down, or is coming to try and torp you, provided your captain has advanced fire training, then you still have 7.9 kilometers range secondaries, and the secondaries, even without the manual fire secondary armament captain skill, and I'll go into the skills in a moment here, is still pretty accurate and is still good self-defense. But it's not ideal. You're reliant on other people. Hey, there's a destroyer here, kill him for me. Or if there's a destroyer somewhere else in the map going for a cap point, you can't stop him capping. You can't touch him. He is immune to you. So what do you get in return for that immunity? Well, you get a pretty powerful alpha strike against everybody else. So I guess you could say the Graf Zeppelin's uniqueness, the thing that sets it out from everyone else, is that it can't touch destroyers, but it's really good against basically everything else. I mean, it's still quite a powerful ship. The offensive capability of the 15 torpedo bombers is really high. So, as I said, we talked about the offensive strike. We one-shot Kerr first and a Bismarck with intact, but you have to take that pinch of salt because AA wasn't on and there's no enemy fighters. In terms of captain skills, well, I've retweaked this captain's abilities because we now have torpedo bombers, which means there are skills that benefit torpedo bombers we didn't take before. So compared to previously, I had adrenaline rush to kind of benefit the secondaries. That's now torpedo acceleration because we've got torpedoes and they're quite slow. So even with torpedo acceleration, which is extra 5 knots, they are only 38 knots in speed. Now, you might argue that because you cannot attack destroyers, torpedo acceleration is not required, and I'm actually leaning over to that, and I need to retest it. The problem is I don't have enough elite commander experience. I already spent 180,000 redoing this captain, and I can't just keep reshuffling the captain around to see what works best. Probably not taking torpedo acceleration would work, because against battleships, aircraft carriers, and large, less maneuverable cruisers, you don't need the torpedo acceleration, and it might even make the approach better because you have a greater drop range. Now, I always drop at minimum distance, so for me that's not a thing, but if somebody likes the drops slightly further back, or because of the cross pattern, the front torpedo up here, you want that to activate, then having torpedo acceleration might not be the best skill. Maybe you would stick with Adrenal Rush, or maybe you would go with Expert Rear Gunner, and I would probably go with Adrenal Rush if I wasn't taking torpedo acceleration, but British cruisers are really fast and they're very quick and maneuverable, and the French ones with the engine overboost are also really fast. So I don't know, it's between one of these two skills. The first 1-point skills between the aircraft servicing expert and the dogfighting expert, that doesn't change. I'd swapped the basic fire training over to the torpedo armament expertise. Now this means that my anti-air is not so good and my secondary guns are not so good because they don't fire as quickly. But at the same time, do you really need that extra AA? Oh, you have a defensive fire, and with good fire control, you really shouldn't be being bombed. And with the reasonable anti-aircraft skills, I mean, 100 damage on the secondaries at 5.4 kilometers. Yes, you don't have manual fire AA skill, but it's pretty good. It's okay. I can live with this, and I keep advanced fire training so that I push the mid-range guns out to 4.2 kilometers. This is what the defensive fire trigger's on. You're basically looking to mitigate damage. You're not looking to kill off the planes. It's fine. because I swapped the manual fire control for secondary armament, which I was trying before in the dive bomber setup to try and get like 9-kilometer range secondaries that were laser accurate. It's not really necessary. It's not super laser accurate, but it's still shotgun accurate at your target. So I felt that the concealment on the Graf Zeppelin without it at 14 kilometers plus was just too awkward, too tricky. It just didn't quite work. Whereas now that we have torpedo bombers and fighters, we're trying to actually go down the legit carrier line, and for me the sweet spot for concealment is between 10 and 12 kilometers. Anything more than 12 kilometers and you are too detectable, and planes will see you, ships will see you from far away, and people will take lob shots at you from like battleships from like 18 kilometers away. They'll just take a shot at you if they can see you and they have a line of sight. Whereas if you go under 10 kilometers of detection, this is why I don't take concealment next on a Japanese aircraft carrier, your reaction time to being spotted by a stealthy destroyer that's come around the corner, or he's flanked the team or whatnot, and he's now coming after you, you now know, if you're in that 10 to 12 kilometer range, you've got enough time to redirect planes, logically find out where the destroyer is and go spot him. So it's an early warning thing. If you had a concealment in the Japanese ones, that would take you down to like 9 kilometers or less, and then it's actually quite difficult to react in time. But the concealment expert on the Graf Zeppelin means your concealment goes to 11.9. This is about what the Hiryu is. The Hiryu is at 11.8. So it actually makes the Graf Zeppelin far more flexible in terms of moving closer to your target. So this is a 19-point captain build. I feel it works better. You can get more maneuverable, you still have reasonable AA, you keep the advanced fire training. This allows you to still have your secondaries, because your secondaries are the only deterrent if something gets really, really close, destroyer-wise, and you can't rely on anyone else. In terms of modules, I still prefer the double damage control system 1 and 2, just to reduce the chance of fire and flooding, and then reduce the amount of time you are on fire for. Consumables, you take premium each, but I guess you could go cheap in the defensive fire. In terms of exterior on the ship setup, any camel if you're choosing, any flag if you're choosing. In terms of signals, I do like to take the secondary signal just to boost the secondary range up to 7.9 kilometers. Because we now have torpedo bombers, we take both signals that give the flooding chance. We don't have a dive bomber that causes fire. It's unlikely we're going to use our secondaries for fire, but we want as much flooding chance as possible, just so we have that flexibility. The fourth signal, we can go with speed on the ship. We can go with the AA signal. I'd probably go with speed if it was being more serious, but for the most part, that's pretty much how you would set up the Graf Zeppelin. So before I just go into this random game here and we showcase how strong this ship is it good enough for a release? Is this the final version of the Graf Zeppelin? And you have to think, where are you going to use it? What is it going to be for? Now, if this was for random, then yes, random battles alone, this Graf Zeppelin would probably pass the grade. It might even just be a little bit too strong, just with the torpedo bombers and how well you can damage large targets. But I guess that's the objective. It's supposed to go after large battleships, right? But you can sort of one-shot these guys with a very good approach. So that might be a little bit too powerful. In terms of ranked, the torpedo bomber fighter Graf Zeppelin versus in a meta at tier 8 against the Shikaku that's running balance 2-2-2, it's actually kind of close, because the Shikaku can cross-drop destroyers and it can spot with the dive bombers, but the Zeppelin is almost Saipan-esque in that its sole goal, although the Saipan can also cross-drop destroyers, is actually quite difficult because of the speed of the torpedoes and the fact we've only got 3. The Zeppelin and the Saipan would both go after a battleship, for example. So you would be going after larger cruisers or battleships in a ranked scenario, and your fighters would be able to basically hold their own against the Shikaku ones if well microed. So it's theoretically possible to use the Zeppelin in a ranked scenario, and the fact that it's got secondaries in super late game and it could use those in a tanking sort of offensive capability, I know it's a gimmick, but it always comes out. I've always had games where I've had to rely on basically pushing the carrier. It's interesting. It could be good. The problems, though, is that the fighters are weak in terms of health pool, which means they're going to have a hard time scouting. You're not going to have anything to scout with the Graf Zeppelin. It's all about offensive punch, hitting hard and hitting as quick as possible. You're not going to be giving the eyes to your team as well as it was. And this then comes to Clan Wars / competitive, if Clan Wars ever was tier 8, but mainly competitive at tier 8. The Graf Zeppelin is not in a place where it can be competitive because you're mostly a scouting role in the current setup of the game. Now, wargaming might change how carriers work in the vaunted carrier rework, but in the current scenario and meta, the planes are too weak, the dive bombers / torpedo bombers, however which setup you use, are too slow. At 135 knots, even if they drop their payload, they're not fast enough to avoid the Shikaku's fighters, whereas the Shikaku's dive bombers, when they drop their payload, they are fast enough to avoid an enemy Shikaku's fighters, and quite possibly the slightly faster Graf Zeppelin's fighters. So the point I'm getting at is that the dive bombers are immune to your fighters because they can go scout, and the torpedo bombers can attack a target. And in competitive, you're not necessarily attacking with the torpedo bombers, so you've got 3 fighters, and you've got 1 torpedo bomber waiting for a target that may or may not come the whole battle, and then the 2 dive bombers are basically still doing the same scouting role. The Zeppelin could scout with the torpedo bombers, but they're slower, which means they can't go to they can't go outside of fighter defense or outside of AA bubbles where they can fall back on. If they're behind enemy lines, scouting the back line, the enemy fighters are going to catch them quite easily. And so they would need protection. And then because of the AA focus fire, the teamwork is so hostile to carriers in tier 8, 9, or 10 that your chances of attacking something with the Graf Zeppelin are quite low. You're not realistically going to hit anything because you'll be defensive fired and everything will die. And then the problem with the limited drop range of the Graf Zeppelin is that sometimes in competitive games, if there was a smoke cloud and there was a lot of ships in the smoke, I would have a Shikaku set up without torpedo acceleration to maximize the drop range of the torpedo bombers, torpedoes, right? Because it doesn't have that minus 20% range modifier. So you could drop at maximum range and you could just fire torps into the smoke, and then the planes would survive barely, and then they would escape, okay? And then those torpedoes would run into the smoke like any other destroyer smoke. Zeppelins can't do that because the drop range of the Zeppelin is really, really short. So you're still inside the long range, medium range AA defensive fire, and they're all going to die. So I don't see how the Graf Zeppelin can work in a competitive environment. It's just not there. But that's not to say it couldn't work. The simple fact is the current flight control mod can be kept for a random / ranked setup, and then we could have a second option that would give us a third fighter plane. Maybe we go 3-1-2, maybe we go 3-2-1, maybe we go 4-1-0. I mean, there's a whole bunch of options that Wargaming can try, but ultimately it needs an extra fighter to deal with the fact that the Shikaku can have 3 fighters, and the Lexington, if for whatever reason anyone took it, has 2 strong fighters as well. And it's the same problem that the Enterprise comes with. Because the Shikaku can have 3 fighters, that's the problem. It is setting the standard that if because in a scouting meta and air control you need the 3 fighter waves, or you need 2 really powerful fighters, and that's where the Lexington's 2 big fighter waves comes into play. So the Zeppelin needs that third fighter wave, and if at the third fighter wave, then 3 fighters would make it work against the Shikaku's 3 fighters. And then if you don't want to clone the Shikaku by having 1 cross-dropping torpedo deep water thing and then maybe some dive bombers, well, maybe you can throw in 2 torpedo bombers and then 1 dive bomber, or you could mix it up, right? But the point is, the torpedo bombers are probably going to stay deep dive. You wouldn't have shallow water, and you wouldn't intermix the thing. And then when I say add dive bombers, I think this ship is close to being really, really good. Honestly, I would tone down the damage on the torpedo bombers if I could get a 6th plane wave for a dive bomber. If I could get a 6th plane wave that was a dive bomber, now specifically, I'm not talking armor-piercing super nuke dive bomber, I'm just talking just a high explosive dive bomber with the circle drop pattern. That would be very interesting in the Graf Zeppelin because you have a second source of damage over time, fire. It's a circle pattern, which means the circle pattern, yes, you're going to miss, but typically it's quite accurate and you can get a hit. It means you can slightly inconvenience destroyers. You can fire them, you can reset a cap if it's on the other side of the map. You can do a follow-up attack on a large target and get some fires, or you can work with a team, or you can use it in a scouting role, drop the payload and just scout with the 1 dive bomber where the torpedo bombers are doing the work and the fighters are doing the work. Now the problem is, at the moment, the Graf Zeppelin is quite strong, and the 3 torpedo bombers is really powerful. So is it worth having 10,500 alpha damage per torpedo? I would tone that down. I don't know to what number would work. Maybe 9,500 or 9,000. I mean, that drop in the alpha strike and the torpedoes and then giving it a dive bomber would be a good flexibility for random and ranked. And then giving it some sort of fighter heavy setup would make it viable in a fighter heavy meta of ranked or competitive. So it's close. It's kind of close. I think the fact that it can't do anything destroyers is kind of a problem unless you use your secondaries, and giving it a dive bomber would kind of mitigate that problem. But that's my mentality. It's nearly there. in its current setup, but it's perhaps a little bit too strong in some areas in terms of its alpha striking on larger targets, and then it's too weak in destroyers, being an inconvenience. We don't want to go kill them, and we like the deep water torpedoes in that we're not going to go gank them all, and that's fine because of the extra alpha strike, but you still need to be able to hit them outside of your secondary range of your guns, right? So it's close. I like this carrier setup far more than any of the other setups for the Graf Zeppelin. I never got to try the super overpowerful shallow water torpedoes, which were incredibly dangerous as destroyers. Right, now in this game, random battle with throws into tier 10, so be it. Enemy Shukaku, okay, that's the benchmark. We can't touch the Gearing or the Yugumo or either of the two German destroyers because we can't touch them. It's just like we can scout them, but we can't kill them. The Demon and the Kudasov, they're anti-air cruisers. We could kill them, we can hit them with torps, but it's unlikely with the defensive fire reducing the damage and killing off the planes, so we're going to have to go for one of the battleships. Montana's quite high, Iowa's quite high. Tirpitz, Bismarck, Amagi, they're good targets for us, and we can help our team by doing that. Right there. One of the other things that's quite good is the loading times for the Graf Zeppelin. It's also quite fast. This is actually a small kind of one of their national perks is that the prep time for the planes are very, very quick. Before, this didn't really matter because what's the point of getting your planes out quickly? Yes, you can get fighters, I guess, over a cap, and then you sort of can do some sort of air control, letting your destroyer get to a cap point. But when you're actually at the target, your planes are weak. So there's no point prepping super weak planes and getting them there super quick if they can't necessarily do anything when they get there. And that was the same with the dive bombers. There's no point having dive bombers that could load super fast and then fly out to the target because the enemy team's still clumped up and the A is still too high. You have to wait till everyone spreads out and then find your target that's isolated. And that's kind of the same principle right now. We have our fighter planes that are very, very quickly out in the field, and yeah, that gives us our early spots, but we need to be careful that we don't let it fly into heavy AA and lose a plane, because that'd be bad in terms of the fighter duel. I'm just going to move the ship slightly up north so I don't get caught off guard here. We'll group up the torpedo bombers, just like I said earlier, they're better using a single attack. The good thing about the quick prep times is more of the turnaround of the torpedo bombers. If you take torpedo armor and expertise, the quicker turnaround of the torpedo bombers means that it's between 17 and 20 seconds. It's actually a very fast turnaround for the torpedo bombers. And because we've now using Concealment Expert, we can see on the minimap that our detection range is way smaller. It's far more manageable. Okay, so our team has double gearings, which is good, and they're pressuring B and C. I don't see anyone on the enemy team necessarily denying the B or the C caps at the moment, so I don't need to go fly in that particular area, and I'm just waiting for the map to develop. Whether or not the enemy starts capping a point or a B cap is stalled and isn't moving anywhere, then I'll go and try and spot and help my team out. And okay, so there's a Yugumo. I don't want to necessarily fly over him too long. Montana's went north. I kind of want to go around the Yugumo because I don't want to lose a random plane, which happens. It's very frustrating when that happens, when it goes. And there's plenty of options of people with radar here, so I don't. It's enough to have known what it was, and there's a Minotaur here, so he can kill that dive bomber, so I don't care too much about that. Now, these destroyers, I can't do anything to them. Like, I'll show you the auto attack. You see that? Impossible to hit target. You see that? Impossible to hit target. So, it's nice that the UI gives us a little caveat saying, you know, you can't do nothing to these guys, so don't even try. Still haven't seen anything other than the Montana, and that's who we're going for, so. Okay, dive bomber's down, that's great. Where's his fighters? I mean, there's these torpedo bombers. Oh, that's a Des Moines. Need to be very careful there. We just saw that on the minimap before it came up. It looks like he's maybe trying to bomb the Friedrich. So I'll pull my bombers over the Minotaur while I try and go for his torpedo bombers because my planes are quite quick. I should be able to at least maybe inconvenience the rear group. Is he paying attention? Is he going to let me strafe them? I think he is. Oh, okay. Fair enough. Oh, no! Oh, that's fair enough. The guy was... I don't think the enemy Shikaka was paying particularly well. I wasn't paying attention. He could have strafed them, but he's flown straight over a Minotaur, so the Minotaur's AA just wrecked his fighters. Alright, here's our battleships, all up in one kind of group. So they're all up going A. This might not be the most exciting game. I'll try and get a hit in, but the problem is they're too clumped up. With this level of anti-air, with the Des Moines in the way, maybe we can go for the Montana. If we can maybe attack the Montana from the side, as long as he doesn't have any additional AA support, because it's 15 torpedo bombers, it's 3 waves, we should hit him with at least 2 full health waves, close enough, and then we can do some damage that way. Okay, I don't want to fly over the gearing with the torpedo bombers because him and his AA is no joke. So he's already killed our plane. Right. Alright, so the Montana is going close to the island, so I'm going to have to go around. So I have to go around and attack him from the top. Or alternatively, I can go for either the Bismarck or the Torpedos here, but their AA combined is also quite scary. And I don't think this Montana is going to live particularly long, so I might have the torpedo bombers go around and attack from the top at the moment. Because he's pushing into double destroyers. I mean, that's a really suicidal move. With double destroyers, the ability to torp. Let's go around. Oh, he's beached himself. I mean, they're going to be proxy spotting, so it's really a question of do they have torps enough to finish him off. An AFK and Maggie. Had I known that, we would have gone for him. No matter. Okay, so my hand gets some torps off. It should be enough to finish him off. I'm gonna weasel this fighter around just in case there's a catapult fire. Yep, so the catapult fire, I'm gonna bring the fight over in case of the catapult fire. Bismarck is gonna go around the corner, so we're just gonna wait and be patient a moment. Maybe I can attack him like that and go around. Oh, I see his fighters are going after mine, so I'm just going to pull over some friendly New Orleans AA. Don't worry about him too much. Okay. Let's group this guy up. We'll bring him along and along. I don't want to... he knows what's coming. And he's turning away. So he's turning away, so I'm going to attack him from this side. And I'm going to bring that fighter in close. That's a shame. Is he trying to turn back in? Well, let's have a look. So this will be the main goal will, I reckon. I mean, it's immensely powerful. You know, you see how many spare planes there were left over. I mean, we only did 33,000 damage, and if we were Shikaka, we could have probably alpha struck him as well. He did take a big hit from the battleship, but even if he didn't take a big hit from the battleship, he would have probably died there regardless. I mean, it's quite powerful, the strike capability against the battleship. That's for sure. Is it too powerful? That's the thing, isn't it? I think I'm going to turn around because it's safer to go south. Maybe we can move up as well. Well, in terms of targets, the Iowa and the Tirpitz are still good targets for us to go after in terms of things that don't have a defensive fire system. It's only just basically these two guys. So if I bring two fighters together and deal with his one fire, then the turnaround time of the torpedo bombers should be relatively quick. Yeah, you see that was 17 seconds there. The gearing could be a problem though. I mean, I know he's really low, but I can't touch him. That's one of the problems with the ship. The gearing's wounded and he's low health, but without a dive bomber or something to do anything, I'm kind of limited. And another nice thing is that this fighter isn't spotting me because the concealment expert is actually really, really helping. Let's not click on it. I wonder what 4v4 happens. I'm just curious in a straight up engagement what would happen, equal numbers. Although I am spotted, so I'm thinking of maybe going down south because I don't have priority target in this build, so it's if I am being shot at, then it's good to know when. So it's 2 and 2, so it looks like it's a fair. Hard to say, but it looks like it's a kind of a close run thing. But you don't want that. You want to win by dominating factor. Now that Torpedo is tempting because so long as the gearing does a defensive fire to rest and damage, it's full health Torpedo. We can maybe really punish him here. It's basically just grouping up the torpedo bombers so that nice and tight. So he's got a fire plane coming in. I'm going to bring over my one. Now you see he's turning so heavily here. How is he going to work? I think I'm going to have to go from the left. His A is going to be an issue, so I want to come in and attack him that way. If this guy was smart, he would strafe right through it. I mean, we should be able to get this chap. He would exit strafe. But he doesn't seem to be that smart, so I'm just going to do it this way. Nearly activated those ones, but I want these 3 to activate. That wasn't even detonation, that was 6 torps. 6 torps finished him off, so you realise I hit 15 on him, so I could probably only send 2 waves and I would have killed him off and I could save the 3rd wave. So I was more conservative with how many bomber waves I send in. I could have used one elsewhere, but sending in a single wave after the Iowa could have been wasteful. So send in all 3 to be guaranteed. Now, with the cross-drop pattern, the front ones, I'm not sure if I do it further back, I guarantee the front ones hit. But the problem is then the middle line of 3, you start running the risk of that. You're giving them more time to react because you're dropping further behind, and then they can try and dodge that main 3. So what you're really, for me, I'm aiming to hit with the central 3 and then the tail. So I'm honestly only working with 12 torpedo bombers because unless I do it perfectly and then get a maximum potential of 15, then it might not work. And then when you start losing planes, you lose the tail planes first, I think. So we'll see. Or I'll see with more games kind of how it works. But at the moment, it's strong. I mean, he's the guy was saying it was OP and I killed him. And don't get me wrong, he was wounded. He didn't have the greatest amount of health pool. But the fact is, a lot of these torpedoes were excess, overkill. If he was at full health, Tirpitz or Bismarck, then yeah, he would have probably died. Now, I really want to attack this Iowa, but I don't think I'm going to get the opportunity. I think the Monarch and the Gearing are going to wound him beforehand. But full health in real-world scenarios with anti-air, unless the guy's paying attention and he's clicking all the planes because it's 3 waves and not singular large waves, focus fire and manual fire isn't going to make a big difference in the planes because the guy has to actually manually interact with it. So the ship's quite powerful in some scenarios, going after battleships and in theory going after cruisers if we chose to do that. But I reiterate my case, I would prefer to... Oh, I get this over. And now I can't do anything. I can't go after the Gearing, I can't go after the Z-52 because... Well, I'm useless. I can't touch those. I don't even have a dive bomber to inconvenience them, and that's why I was talking about earlier, having a dive bomber to maybe clip some fire or do a little bit of harassment or do a little bit of spotting, but not be the main damage source. In terms of team score, we got some targets. We got a reasonable amount of base, 1200. It's fine. We got some plane kills. We did a little bit of supportive gameplay. You can't really expect more than that. The Graf Zeppelin potential there is huge. The fact that you can absolutely smack large ships with large health pools and you can kill them off is really dangerous. Now, it's not the same as point and click adventure with the dive bombers. See, before with the armor piercing dive bombers, you could click on the target and then that was it. Just boom, you line it up, you click on the target, boom, it obliterates it, gone. And you could even do that through defensive fire somewhat on certain ships. And that was way too much, and it was so inconsistent with how the armor-piercing dive bombers did do damage to some targets, but didn't do damage to other targets. It more or less did no damage to the shores anyway, but at least you could marginally inconvenience them by doing a small amount of damage, and you could like reset caps or try and finish off low health targets. We've traded that now in the Graf Zeppelin, where it's all... The only damage mitigation number you need to look at is the torpedo protection damage reduction, which is actually listed on the top right there. So, in that respect, you know how much damage this is going to do. You can aim for the tail, the stern, or the front to basically guarantee a flood. And you have an understanding of how much damage this does. So it's far more consistent in the damage output. Before, I didn't like the inconsistency with like the dive bombers. Now I actually like the ship. I could play the ship and it's enjoyable, but it's just not quite, at least in my playstyle. Like I say, I would like that extra dive bomber. I would like to tone down maybe the torpedo bomber damage a little bit, because you are getting floods and you don't need to send all 3 waves. It would be nice to have a dive bomber and the 3 torpedo bomber waves. Reduce the alpha of the torpedo bomber waves, and then you have all those extra things that I just talked about a few months ago. I think Wargaming's getting close to a release ship, but at the same time, I don't want this to be the only module. This is fine for a random and / rank setup, but I would like to see an alternate fighter setup Graf Zeppelin, so it could be viable in the tier 8 competitive tournaments, King of the Sea, League of the Sea, that type of stuff. I'd like to see the Graf Zeppelin become viable, because at the moment the Lexington isn't and the Enterprise isn't. So if we're going to work on the Graf Zeppelin and we're taking serious considerations here, give it a fighter setup, give it 3 fighters. Now you can give it you want to have 6 plane waves or 5 plane waves, and if you're going to go with 3 fire planes, then you give it 2 torpedo bombers and no dive bombers. You give it 1 torpedo, 1 dive bomber. Do you give it 2 torpedoes and 1 dive bomber? Or, do you give it 4 fighters and go really up there but keep the fighters really weak, but then only give it like 1 torpedo, 1 dive bomber? I don't know, but I want to set up where I can have a 3rd fighter so I can legitimately try to use the ship in competitive. So we're close to Wargaming. You're doing well. We're doing well. Just a little bit more. We're almost there. Just a little bit more trying. Don't make this the finished product. And yeah, hopefully I can give my thumbs up. It's close. Not quite. But we're nearly there. We're nearly there. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll leave it there, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.